Hello, everyone. My name is Leilani Hernandez, and today I'll be presenting on contracts, personnel, and the Code of Ethics in Education. We'll look at how major court cases have shaped policies for school leaders and how ethics intersect with law in guiding our decisions. My goal is to help us all walk away with a clearer understanding of what this means for our own roles as educational leaders. Foundations of Texas School Law. Legal structure of Texas education. Leadership in Texas requires awareness of both traditional governance and newer innovations like charters and districts of innovations, which impact staffing, contracts, and accountability. School leaders and personnel management. Personnel leadership goes beyond equity. Principals are responsible for creating strong hiring practices, fair evaluations, and modeling professionalism at all times. School leaders must recruit, hire, and retain highly qualified staff, provide fair and consistent evaluations, ensure compliance with state, federal law, and model ethical and professional conduct. Personnel responsibilities of Texas school leaders. Personnel leadership is about ensuring the right people are in the right roles and that they are supported and treated fairly throughout their careers. Texas Educator Contract. Certification and credentials required by law, TEA, and the district. Duties described and required to meet state and district rules, including compliance with laws, policies, etc. Criminal history disclosure and compliance is required. Types of teacher contracts in Texas. Texas recognizes three main types of teacher contracts. Understanding these is vital because each one carries different rights and due process protections. Probationary contracts are up to 3 years, sometimes 4, for new employees. Term contracts for a set period of 1 to 5 years with rights to due process. Continuing contracts, indefinite until resignation, retirement, or dismissal for cause. Teacher employment contract. Take a look at the sample contract to the right. A teacher employment contract sample with 1-year contract showing basic structure of employer-employee info, terms, appointment, responsibilities, signature line, and etc. Administrator contracts. Most administrators serve under term contracts. School boards must follow statutory timelines if they choose not to renew. Superintendents and administrators usually are on term contracts. They are subject to board approval and renewal decisions, and they must follow Texas Education Code procedures for non-renewal. Here is a superintendent's amended employment contract taken from Brownsville ISD. This shows how the superintendent's contracts look, and there's several pages. This is an example of the first page. Due process and personnel. The type of contract determines the level of due process an employee is entitled to. Leaders must know these rules to avoid legal errors. Non-renewal of term contracts requires written notice and opportunity for a hearing. Probationary contracts may be ended at end of term with limited appeal rights. Continuing contracts give strongest protections, dismissal only for good cause. Preventive leadership in personnel. Most lawsuits can be prevented through documentation, coaching, and following timelines. Preventive leadership saves districts from legal battles. Document performance concerns clearly and consistently to prevent legal battles. Also, leadership must provide coaching and growth opportunities before moving towards discipline. And they should follow timelines and procedures in Texas Education Code. Employee rights in Texas. Texas law defines clear boundaries on employee rights and responsibilities, especially around contracts and professional conduct. Contract disputes in education. Disputes often arise over non-renewal, termination, or breach of contract. Disputes can involve teachers, administrators, or superintendents. And disputes may be resolved through grievance procedures, hearings, or litigation. Disputes usually happen when one side feels the terms of a contract weren't honored, whether that's a teacher denied renewal or a superintendent dismissed. Leaders must know the legal pathways for resolution. Teacher contract disputes. The type of contract an employee has determines what rights the employee has. This is why leaders must document performance carefully and follow statutory timelines. Probationary teachers have limited appeal rights. Term contracts mean the employee is entitled to due process hearings, and continuing contracts call for that the dismissal requires a good cause standard. Superintendent contract disputes. Superintendent contracts are especially sensitive. Terminations often lead to expensive buyouts or lawsuits. Transparency and board alignment are key. Superintendents usually work under multi-year term contracts. Boards can choose buyouts, negotiated settlements, or termination for cause. And disputes often become public and politically charged. Probationary contracts in Texas. Probationary contracts give districts flexibility, but they can also create uncertainty for new educators. Leaders must balance fairness with district needs, typically used for new teachers or administrators. Probationary contracts can be non-renewed at the end of term with limited rights to appeal, and probationary contracts have a maximum of 3 years or 4 in some cases. Reasons for non-renewal. Non-renewal is not always about misconduct. Often it's about performance, program alignment, or financial constraints. Documentation is critical to defend these decisions. Reasons for non-renewal could be performance deficiencies in instruction, management, or leadership. Another reason for non-renewal could be a failure to follow district policies, or maybe there are budget cuts or program changes. A reason for non-renewal can also be because of misconduct or ethics violations. Preventing contract disputes. Most disputes can be prevented through good leadership practices, especially clear communication and proper documentation. For preventing contract disputes, you will need clear contract language, consistent evaluation and feedback, documented improvement plans, and open communication and fairness. Student discipline and ethics. This ties to equity. School leaders should examine how discipline is applied across different groups of students to ensure fairness. Legal foundations of student discipline. Just like teachers have due process rights, so do students. Leaders must ensure all disciplinary actions align with both state law and federal protections. The Goss versus Lopez 1975 case says students must have notice and hearing before suspension. The Texas Education Code requires process in suspensions, expulsions, and DAEP placements. Discipline must comply with federal civil rights laws. In other words, no discriminatory practices. Disciplinary Alternative Education Program. In Texas, DAEPs are alternative education settings required by the Texas Education Code 37008 for students who commit certain disciplinary violations. The purpose is to provide a structured, supervised environment for students removed from the regular classroom due to serious or persistent misbehaviors. Students may be placed in a DAEP for mandatory reasons or discretionary reasons determined by school leaders. DAEPs must offer an academic program aligned with Texas state standards, plus behavior intervention supports. Principals and administrators must ensure due process when assigning a student to a DAEP, including notice hearings and adherence to state law. Goss versus Lopez, 1975. This case shows that due process is not just for employees. Students also have rights. Leaders must ensure suspension and expulsion procedures follow both Texas Education Code and constitutional law. The conflict started when 9 Ohio high school students were suspended for up to 10 days without being given a hearing. Parents argued this violated the 14th Amendment's due process clause. The Supreme Court held 5-4 that students have a property interest in their public education and a liberty interest in their reputation. Schools must provide notice of charges and an opportunity to be heard before suspensions. The impact of the case established that students, like employees, are entitled to due process protections. The case impacted schools by requiring them to develop fair disciplinary procedures. It also reinforced the principle that education cannot be taken away without constitutional safeguards. Ethical challenges in discipline. One of the biggest ethical challenges is equity. Research shows that minority students and students with disabilities are often disciplined more harshly. Leaders must review data to ensure fairness. Role of leaders in discipline. Leaders set the tone. Discipline is not just about punishment, it's about teaching responsibility and maintaining a safe, respectful environment. Leaders in discipline must establish clear policies, train teachers and staff in restorative practices. They must monitor discipline and data for equity and fairness, and engage parents and community in the disciplinary process. Alternatives to traditional discipline. More school districts are moving away from purely punitive approaches and instead are using restorative practices and PBIS. These approaches reduce suspensions and help students learn from mistakes. Privacy and transparency. Transparency builds community trust, but leaders must balance it with privacy rights. For example, FERPA protects student records. Texas Open Meetings Act governs school board transparency. And the Texas Public Information Act requires access to district records. Equity and professional ethics. Ethical leadership in Texas education means actively guarding against inequity and modeling fairness. Preventive leadership. Preventive leadership emphasizes prevention over litigation. It focuses on staff training for contracts, ethics, and compliance to avoid lawsuits. And leaders must set up systems to catch problems early. This is the heart of leadership, preventing issues before they escalate into costly lawsuits or crises. Legal impacts on educational leaders and school district policy. As principals and district leaders, we are constantly making decisions about personnel, contracts, and professional conduct. If we get it wrong, the consequences can be serious. Lawsuits, loss of trust, even harm to students and staff. This topic matters because understanding the legal landscape helps us avoid mistakes and lead with fairness and integrity. The importance of contracts, personal law, and ethics in educational leadership. Educational leaders make daily decisions guided by law, contracts, and ethics. Missteps in contracts or personnel management can result in lawsuits and loss of trust. Leaders must balance legal compliance, fairness, and ethical standards. Throughout the presentation, I want us to think about 3 guiding questions. 1. What are the legal responsibilities of school leaders in managing contracts and personnel? 2. How do court cases shape district policy? And 3. How do ethics intersect with law in decision making? Core concepts. To set the stage, contracts define the expectations and protections for both the district and employees. Personnel law deals with hiring, evaluations, and discipline, and termination. And the Code of Ethics provides a moral compass, ensuring fairness and equity even when the law is silent. Let's take a look at some court cases that have had a deep impact. Perry v. Sindermann, 1972. In Perry v. Sindermann, a teacher was not renewed, but argued he had an implied tenure based on district practices. The Supreme Court ruled that, even without formal tenure, implied promises could create a property interest, which means due process must apply. For us leaders, the takeaway is clear. We must avoid vague language in policies or handbooks that could unintentionally promise job security. Think about your district's employee handbook. Could any section read as promising more than it should? Board of Regents versus Roth, 1972. This case clarified the limits of due process. A non-tenured professor was not renewed, and he claimed his rights were violated. The court said, unless you have a property or liberty interest in your contract, due process protections don't apply. How could this impact districts? Non-renewal of probationary or one-year contracts generally do not require hearings unless policies create that expectation. Cleveland Board of Education versus Loudermill, 1985. This is one of the most influential personnel cases. Loudermill was fired without being given a chance to respond. The court ruled that public employees with job protection must get notice and an opportunity to respond before termination. That's why we now talk about Loudermill hearings. Does your school district talk about Loudermill hearings? As leaders, we must ensure our school districts have pre-termination procedures in place. Otherwise, we risk violating constitutional due process. North Haven Board of Education versus Bell, 1982. This case expanded Title IX protections. The court ruled that Title IX doesn't just apply to students, it also applies to school employees. That means staff must be protected from sex discrimination in hiring, pay, promotions, and work conditions. Because of this, Districts must monitor equity not only in classrooms but also in employment practices. Ethics and policy tie in. Here is where law and ethics meet. The law tells us what we must do. Ethics challenges us to ask, what is the right thing to do? For example, treating staff fairly in evaluations, avoiding favoritism in promotions, and being transparent in how policies are applied. Ethics build trust. When leaders only do the legal minimum, morale and culture suffer. Ethical leadership in Texas education. In Texas, the Educator's Code of Ethics outlines expected professional behaviors. As leaders, we must model integrity in every decision, even when the law doesn't specifically dictate our actions. Ethical leaders must build trust with staff, students, and community. And ethical decision making has to go beyond just legal compliance. Practicing equity in leadership. Equity is not just about students, it applies to personnel too. Leaders must actively ensure that opportunities for growth and leadership are fair and inclusive. Leaders must address disparities in hiring, pay, and promotion. And leaders must be inclusive to foster strong school communities. Scenarios of ethical leadership. Let's think about common scenarios: hiring, discipline, and conflicts of interest. In each case, ethical leaders prioritize fairness, transparency, and equity. School leaders must avoid favoritism to ensure non discrimination. School leaders must be consistent across all staff. And they must disclose relationships that could cause bias based decisions. Texas Principal Standards. Texas explicitly ties leadership standards to ethics. Principals are expected to ensure that decisions are grounded in both law and equity. For example, Standard 2 says human capital, fairly evaluate and develop staff. Standard 3 says executive leadership, model integrity, fairness, and ethical behavior. Standard 5 says strategic operations, ensure policies and procedures align with law and ethics. Application for educational leaders. When making decisions, I recommend a simple 3-part test. Is it legal, ethical, and equitable? Leaders who use this framework avoid missteps and build stronger schools. Bridgeport Contracts Case 2024. Here's a recent case from Bridgeport, Connecticut. The school board discovered that some employee contracts had been signed without proper approval. The board voted to invalidate those contracts. The fallout: confusion, mistrust, and potential lawsuits. Real-world connections. Thinking back on the Bridgeport case, the lesson here is contracts must go through the correct approval process. Even small shortcuts can cause huge legal and financial risks. Key takeaways. My 3 key takeaways for us as school leaders are: first, due process is not automatic. It depends on contract terms and district policies. 2, personnel decisions must be fair and transparent to avoid lawsuits and maintain trust. 3, ethics strengthen compliance, going beyond legal minimums to build healthy school culture. Reflection questions. To wrap up, here are 3 reflection questions for you to consider and reply to in our discussion posts. 1. How does your district handle non-renewal of contracts? 2. Do you think ethics or law has more influence on school policy? And 3. What policies could your district improve on to prevent legal or ethical conflicts? Conclusion. Looking across the cases mentioned, 3 themes stand out. Contracts must be clear, approved, and documented. Due process applies when employees have established rights, but not automatically. Ethics demand we go beyond compliance, focusing on fairness and equity. In closing, contracts, personnel law, and ethics are deeply connected. The law sets the floor, but the ethics set the ceiling for leadership success. And we have reached the reference page. As you can see, the majority of my references came from the Library of Congress, and my other reference was the Connecticut Post. I want to thank you guys. I want to thank you all for your attention today, and I look forward to hearing your reflections on how these cases and principles apply in your own districts. Have a great semester. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.